The Berlin Wall, a huge, scary wall that divided a city for almost 30 years, fell because of a mistake. It wasn't a big plan. It wasn't a battle. It was an accident. A tired man, at a meeting he didn't even want to be at, said the wrong words on live television. And those few words, spoken by accident, acted like a key. They unlocked a gate that had been sealed for a generation. A whole country, a whole world, held its breath. Everything was about to change because of one clumsy sentence. It was a turning point nobody saw coming. Let's paint a picture of this wall. It wasn't just a normal fence. Imagine a monster made of concrete that snaked right through the middle of a big city called Berlin. It was over 12 feet tall, taller than a basketball hoop. On top there was a smooth, round pipe so nobody could get a good grip to climb over. Behind this first wall was a scary, empty space. This wasn't to stop invaders from getting in. It was to stop its own people from getting out. People called it the Death Strip. It was a wide-open area with bright lights, guard towers, and dogs. The ground was covered in soft sand, like a beach, so that any footprints could be seen easily. This wasn't just a wall. It was a trap. For families and friends, this concrete monster was a heartbreak. It split them apart overnight. A brother might live on one side and his sister on the other. They could be just a few streets away, but it felt like they were on different planets. It was a prison wall, built not to keep enemies out, but to lock its own citizens in. People called it the Death Strip. It was a wide-open area with bright lights, guard towers, and dogs. The ground was covered in soft sand, like a beach, so that any footprints could be seen easily. This wasn't just a wall, it was a trap. For families and friends, this concrete monster was a heartbreak. It split them apart overnight. A brother might live on one side and his sister on the other. They could be just a few streets away, but it felt like they were on different planets. For 28 years, this wall was a scar on the city, a daily reminder of a world cut in two. But a hidden power was growing. In the East German city of Leipzig, people were getting very brave. They started marching together every Monday night. At first, it was just a few people walking quietly through the streets, holding candles. Soon that small group grew. It became hundreds of people, then thousands, then tens of thousands. The quiet walks turned into loud chants for freedom. The streets of Leipzig filled with a river of brave people, showing their leaders they were no longer afraid. This was the power of ordinary people coming together, and their message changed. At first they chanted, "We want out." But as the crowds grew bigger, the chant became something much more powerful. They started shouting, "We are staying here." This meant they didn't want to run away anymore. They wanted to change their own country. The leaders of East Germany saw these huge crowds on their televisions. They were very nervous. The government was losing control, and they knew it. People were no longer listening to them. The leaders felt the ground shaking under their feet. So they had a long, secret meeting. They had to do something to make people happier, to calm things down. They decided to make a new rule. This new rule would let people travel out of the country, but it was supposed to be a small change, with lots of paperwork and waiting. It was their attempt to let a little steam out of the pot without letting the whole thing boil over. And here's where the story takes a wild turn. The leaders wrote this new travel rule down on a small piece of paper. It was a huge, history-making decision. But it was not meant for that night. The plan was to announce it the next day, with lots of details and clear instructions. But in a rush, a man in charge handed that secret note to another man, Günter Schabowski. And Günter was about to walk into a room full of reporters. Let's zoom in on this one man, Günter. He was not a king or a famous general. He was a government worker, and he just had a very long, very boring day at the office. He was tired. He was probably thinking about his dinner. He was not prepared for what was about to happen. He walked into a big, bright room, facing cameras from all over the world. For almost an hour, the press conference was incredibly dull. Günter was talking about government plans that nobody found very interesting. The room was quiet. The energy was low. Reporters started to look at their watches. Some were quietly packing up their cameras and notebooks. It felt like any other Tuesday evening in Berlin. The whole world was about to change, and nobody in the room had a clue. Then, just as it was all about to end, a reporter from Italy asked a simple question. He had heard rumors about new rules for travel, and he wanted to know more. This was the spark. Günter Schabowski suddenly remembered the note that was handed to him. He fumbled for it in his pocket. He pulled out the paper, put on his glasses, and began to read it out loud. The amazing thing is, he was seeing these words for the very first time. Someone asked when the new rule would start. Günter looked at the paper again, but it didn't say. So he just made an assumption. He announced that travel was allowed right away. Immediately, without delay. Imagine you are at home in East Berlin, watching this on your small television. You hear the government man say people can leave. You look at your family. Could it really be true? After 28 years of being trapped, could you just go? The idea began to spread like fire. At first, there was just silence in living rooms across East Berlin. People looked at the TV, then at each other. Did he really say that? A quiet question turned into a hopeful whisper. Then the whisper grew. People started to move. They grabbed their coats and their keys. All across the city, you could hear the sound of apartment doors opening and closing. It was a quiet sound, but together it was the sound of a city waking up. This wasn't just a few people. It was a wave. Small groups left their buildings and joined others on the street. The streams of people became a river, a human river flowing through the dark streets, all heading in one direction. They were all going to the Berlin Wall. They had to see for themselves. Was it real? Could a wall that stood for nearly 30 years fall because of a few mumbled words on the news? They had to find out. Now think about the guards at the wall. Their whole job was to stop people from crossing. Suddenly, hundreds, then thousands of people are showing up. They are smiling and saying they are allowed to cross. The guards were completely confused. Their phones were ringing off the hook. But no one had any real orders for them. The situation was impossible. They were trained to face anger and threats. They were not trained to face a giant, happy crowd. At one checkpoint, a guard named Harold Jaeger saw the crowd getting bigger and bigger. He was scared someone would get hurt in the crush of people. He was a guard, but he was also a person watching his own people. He kept calling his bosses for orders. He needed someone to tell him what to do, but no orders came. The government that built the wall was silent. Harold was on his own, facing a moment of history. So he made a choice. Not as a guard following a rule book, but as a person. To keep everyone safe, he finally gave the order to his men. He told them to open the gate. And with that one human decision, the wall broke. The first people walked through, slowly at first, like they couldn't believe it was real. They were stepping into a world they had only dreamed of, and a new chapter for the world had just begun. The first people who crossed felt a strange mix of fear and pure joy. They hugged strangers on the other side. Families, separated for nearly 30 years by this ugly concrete scar, ran into each other's arms, crying. It was a flood of pure human feeling, washing away decades of sadness in a single night. The city of Berlin became one giant party. People climbed on top of the wall, dancing and singing. The sound wasn't anger anymore. It was freedom. For the first time in a generation, the city was not divided. It was whole. This wasn't just a political event. It was the world's biggest, most meaningful block party. Then, something amazing began. People showed up with hammers and chisels. They started chipping away at the wall. Piece by piece, they began to take it down themselves. They were not waiting for permission. They were taking back their city with their own hands, one chunk of concrete at a time. Each strike of a hammer was like a tiny vote for freedom. It was a powerful symbol. The huge, scary wall, built by a powerful government, was being torn apart by ordinary people. The sound of those hammers echoed through the city, a soundtrack of a world changing forever. News of the wall's fall spread like wildfire across the globe. World leaders watched on TV, stunned. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. A wall that had defined the world for decades was just gone. It was a moment that showed everyone that history can turn